Hello, Rosebuds. Welcome back to the Hill of Roses, where we come once again to celebrate our independent policy movement for progress to bring power to the people. Thanks for holding on with us as we had a little delay. We got to line up with our special candidate here today in Jason Call. He's a congressional candidate from Washington's 2nd District. Jason, welcome to the program.
I appreciate very much the opportunity to let everybody know about my campaign. Happy to talk with you.
Yeah, I'm really glad to be able to talk with you as well, Jason. But before I get into what we care about the most on this platform, which is strategy and policy and really how do we get change done for the people, I wanted the folks to get to know you a little bit better. What was your inspiration for getting into politics in general and then this race specifically?
Oh, hold on. Looks like I've got a...
Well, okay. There's a freeze out there with Jason there. Hopefully we'll get to know him a little bit better there. I think he's in another interesting race where he's running on a lot of our, core kind of people-focused platforms. Especially, I like Jason's platform in terms of democracy. So hopefully he'll be back.
Okay.
Hey.
I'm here. Sorry, just a little bit of instability with my internet connection. I've got it fixed. Okay. So where did I get started?
Yeah.
I got my start in activism when I was 19 years old, when I was a sophomore at the University of Washington, and the United States invaded Iraq for the first time with Desert Storm. And so I was part of an anti-war youth movement, student youth movement. And so I got out in the streets and did war protesting, and I've considered myself an anti-war activist since that point. I'll be 49 in July, so that's almost 30 years of what I consider street activism there. And I got into helping some presidential campaigns. I think in particular, I started working with Howard Dean's campaign in 2003. I just it was a monster. It would have been a monstrous thing to have Bush reelected. So I felt I was compelled to get involved in what I saw at that time as the most viable left-wing campaign. Although certainly Howard Dean turned out to be something entirely different than I thought he was. And then I moved on to supporting Kucinich's campaign in 2008, and then transferred that over to working for Obama. Again, another huge disappointment. And then, really got sparked to get involved with my local Democratic Party when Bernie Sanders announced in 2015. So I had dabbled a little bit in being this, sort of fringe PCO, trying to push the party to the left, always really frustrated with the internal work.
Such a struggle, right?
And but once Bernie kind of really got me activated, we as the Bernie movement here in Washington State, I was sort of a lead congressional district volunteer to try and get people motivated and involved. Before the Bernie campaign even showed up here, a number of us knew how to get people activated and involved. And so we got people involved in their local Democratic Party, got people involved in having the party endorsing Bernie, but there's just a huge divide in the Democratic Party along the establishment and progressive lines. It has not gone away. So for my own race, I'm challenging an incumbent who has been my congressman here in the 2nd District since he got elected. And to give you an idea of how long he's been in office, he was first elected when Bill Clinton was still president.
Oh, wow.
So he's always been a very conservative representative, votes with Republicans on many issues. And so I've been waiting for somebody to challenge him from the left, and nobody has really been successful at challenging him from the left. And this year, certainly Bernie's resurgence for the 2020 campaign, it just kind of fell to me. A lot of people said, "Hey, why don't you do this thing?" I was hesitant at first, but I'm excited about political activism. I've got a big mouth. I'm not afraid about sticking my neck out there. And so we announced our campaign last August, and things have been going very well. So I'm excited to be doing this, and I I believe that we will be on the ballot in the general. Our primary is August 4th, but I believe we will be on the ballot next to the incumbent. And, then the voters of this district will have a real choice, a choice that they have not had in the last 20 years.
Yeah, I think that's kind of part of a common trend that I've seen with a lot of the folks that have come onto our program, that it's kind of a continuation of a movement force in several candidates being the inspirational background, and that all of them are kind of challenging these very incumbent Democrats that are these long tenured ones. The only exception was when we interviewed someone from New York 15, where someone was a long-term incumbent but decided to just finally give up the seat. That doesn't always happen. I'm curious, in your mind, what has led to this continual relationship with this incumbent in office? How have the people not seen what they've done? What are some examples that you personally are aggrieved by why they need to be replaced?
Well, my personal battles with the incumbent started around 2005 when he signed on to that Bankruptcy Reform Act. And that was, huge giveaways to the banking industry, made it much more difficult for working people to file for bankruptcy when they were in financial straits, made it so shedding medical bankruptcy was substantially more difficult. And the big one is that student loan debt. You cannot relieve student loan debt through bankruptcy now. So you take out student loans and you're stuck with them for life. And I don't know how much people really look to individual pieces of legislation like that, but that is something that I have been highlighting. You've got I myself, I have $45,000 still in student loans that I've been paying off for the last 15 years. I feel fortunate that I'm not in a position where I'm making payments and my balance is increasing. And I know a lot of people are stuck in that, the payments they can afford, but the interest that they are accruing means that they're never going to get rid of this debt. I will, in another 10, 15 years or so, I will finally be balance free. But I wanted to get into this also to, as Bernie said, wipe student debt free. It is such a drain on the working class, and it really keeps the poor and the working class in chains. I mean, everybody was encouraged to go to college. I was a high school teacher for 18 years. The big push in school systems is for people to go to college and not just turn around and enter the workforce, but college education, vocational education. And I'm supportive of all of those things. I mean, those things, when people are trying to better themselves through education, that is a net benefit to the economy. But then you're talking about shackling these people for the rest of their lives. And it's unfair. We've got to do better than that. So I'm looking to wipe away student debt, and certainly I would be supportive of that legislation when I'm in college. And so I point to that as a piece of legislation that the incumbent has supported. Right after Dodd-Frank, when the banking institutions were somewhat better regulated through the Dodd-Frank legislation after the TARP bailouts. The incumbent here has been part of trying to loosen some of those regulations. So he certainly has a good relationship with the banking lobby. And that really is another thing that I've been highlighting here, is that this is somebody who takes 75% of his funding from corporate sources, whether it's PACs or, CEO types and business people. So he gets his money from very corporate and conservative sources. He's benefited greatly from Citizens United. His funding from the fossil fuel industry has tripled since Citizens United was implemented. Boeing is a huge employer over here, and while I'm extremely supportive of Boeing as a workforce, and I respect Boeing as an employer, they're a giant corporation that tries to shirk all of the regulatory rules. And, just speaking about the incumbent again, the only leadership position that he holds is chair of the aviation subcommittee of the transportation committee. Well, he has held that position through the Boeing. If you know about the 737 MAX program, a couple of planes crashed, hundreds of people died, thousands of Boeing workers were laid off. And really, this has come back to a lack of effective regulation, where the House Aviation Subcommittee is supposed to be the regulatory body on aircraft manufacturing. They essentially let Boeing regulate itself with this new 737 MAX program, and that has been identified as part of the problem with these crashes. So we're talking about this relationship with business and politicians that is not beneficial to the working class in terms of wage, salary, benefits, but it's also not beneficial to consumer safety.
Yeah.
People die. I mean, I am not afraid of saying corporations will kill people for profit. And so, Boeing's CEO was fired over the 737 MAX failures, but he still walked away with a $60 million severance package. And that's just a slap in the face to the working class. But the incumbent I'm challenging will never do anything to more tightly regulate the industries that are funding him. And I think that is the huge problem that we've got here in Congress, is this corporate corruption through Citizens United and other means of corporate funding of campaigns. That's one of the reasons I'm taking no corporate cash, as I'm sure you've heard from other people that you've interviewed.
Yeah, I think that's really one of, again, I would say a few litmus test items here is you got to trust that the people they're listening to are the people that are giving them money at the end of the day. I think there is a very direct relationship. As much as people don't want to say it's like a quid pro quo, there's a little bit of who you're beholden to. You're not going to piss off the people who are keeping you alive politically. But, I also was going to want to dive into a little bit more about that student loan debt, but I want to pause it there for a moment to talk about a little bit more of your district specifically. We talked about your inspiration and the person running. Can you tell me a little bit more about, Washington's 2nd District? I have a little bit of the background here for you, the San Juan Islands here, but explain what your district's kind of like for the people out there.
So we're a mix of urban and rural. If you're at all familiar with Washington State geography, you probably know where the Puget Sound is. So we've got this big inlet of water. My district starts about 20 miles north of Seattle. The Seattle's in King County. I live in Snohomish County, which is the county directly north. And so the border between King and Snohomish County is where my district starts. It runs the I-5 corridor for about 75 miles up north to Whatcom County, where Bellingham is. And then it includes Whidbey Island and the San Juan Islands in the Puget Sound. So it's not a small district by geography, but it's not a giant district either. And like I said, we've got the urban mix that is in the south end, and then we get a rural stretch somewhere in the middle, and it gets a little bit more urban at the top end, and then the islands are rural communities also. We've got a couple of naval bases in the district. So I've been told that that may be a challenge for me, getting some of the more military-minded folks. I mean, I have put bluntly out on my policy platforms that I think we need to reduce military spending. We need to reduce our military presence around the world. And certainly in our district, we have some problematic issues with the military, with pollution. And not just sort of, we've got groundwater pollution that's coming off of one of the military bases that has essentially poisoned the water in that area. But we also have this program here that's called the Navy Growler program. And the Growlers are the old F-18 Hornets. They were interceptor fighters, but now these have been redesigned to be electronic surveillance. And the entire fleet of Growlers is stationed at Whidbey Island Naval Station. And these things are flying morning, noon, at night over populated areas. The Navy has said that this is a strategic location for us to do our training missions. But it has had a hugely negative impact, not only on the wildlife in the area, but just on human living in the area. So I've had people who have been strong supporters of the Navy tell me, the incumbent's not doing anything about this, and we need somebody to do something about this, because essentially quality of life on that island is destroyed by the presence of these jets. They're flying at 130 decibels. And the science says that if you're exposed to prolonged 85 decibels or louder, that can cause hearing loss. And so, we've got some real problems that we need to deal with. And I would tell anybody around that, I am not anti-military per se. I am certainly anti-militarism. I think our military adventurism is out of control. But I came from a military family. My father was Air Force. He served in Vietnam. I believe in military for defense purposes, but our military adventurism around the world with 800 bases, and certainly I opposed war for oil, and I think our military is used as a police force to prop up corporations as they steal the resources from indigenous communities around the world. I mean, it kind of works hand in hand with what our CIA has done over the last 70 years. So it's hard to get people to open their eyes to that because people are very attuned to American exceptionalism, which I oppose. I think we need to have a much better partnership with other countries around the world. So that's my perspective there. But we're a solidly Democratic district. We're a solidly blue district. The incumbent has won his races against libertarians or Republicans for the last 20 years by a 2-to-1 margin, really.
Okay.
So I'm looking forward to having 2 Democrats on the ballot, one conservative, the other one progressive. And again, I said let the voters make their choice based on that.
Yeah, I certainly we can hope to have that result compared to at least the Republicans and libertarians in this race. I'm curious to hear, like, in your first term, let's say you are to win in this primary and go on to the general and win that as well. How are you going to plan to strategically accomplish, your agenda? Like, I think some of the foreign policy items tend to be, there's a lot of focus on that on the presidential level because they have that executive authority over our foreign policy. How do you think you can influence Congress to start enacting some of these changes that you're fighting for on that focus of anti-militarism?
Well, I think people are recognizing the fact. I'm going to pause here. I've got this thing dinging on my a chat thing that I've got dinging, and I'm going to try and turn this thing off for a second here. So give me just a second. All right. So all right. So what I really feel, and I say this as a sort of just as a voter, just as a citizen and a voter, I never feel like our elected representatives are being fully honest with us. I think they speak to us in terms. Whoops, that didn't work. Then they speak to us in terms of. This is driving me nuts here. I don't know how to turn this thing off while it's dinging at me. So they speak to us in very sort of couched terms that are protective of the industries that are funding them. So it's I want to talk to the voters of the district in a very honest manner. I want to make sure that they understand that I'm working for them. I think the fact that I'm taking no corporate funding is going to speak to them, because I think a lot of people really do feel like our Congress is bought off. And we've got. I looked at the 46% of the people who did not vote at all in the 2016 election. Why did they feel disengaged in the last election? And some of them are to the left and some of them are the right, but a lot of them feel like our government is just corrupt. And I don't know how you speak to voters in terms of anti-corruption unless you're the person saying, look, I'm just not going to participate in this. I know it puts me at a disadvantage, although it puts me at one of the things that I would like to say about that is that my opponent raises and spends $1 million every cycle. He doesn't need that money. It does not take that much money to effectively run a campaign. You could run a campaign probably with about 200 grand, and that is paying some staff and printing the literature that you need to get out to your public. All of the rest of that is just, in my opinion, it's bribery and it's grift. So what I would what I would say to the public is, I'm not taking any corporate money. And so you can feel comfortable that I am serving you. And I'm also the kind of person, like I said, I got a big mouth. If something is going on that, take away things that may be national security issues, but if there was, backroom dealings in Congress and people want to know, why did this person vote this way, or how come we couldn't get this piece of legislation passed because it's obviously going to be beneficial for the people of our district, I'm the kind of person that's going to come straight back to my district and I'm going to talk to my constituents and I'm going to say, I got to tell you everything that's going on here. You don't get talked to like this by your congressional representatives. They are very protective of industry. I am not protective of industry. I want to be protective of jobs. I want to be protective of salary, but I'm not interested in CEO profits or shareholder profits. I want the constituents of my district to know the real story of how they talk about how the sausage gets made in DC. That's where I want to come from. So I want to build a level of trust with the voters in my district. And I think that's got to be the basis for everything is a level of trust. And I don't think you can get that trust while you're taking corporate money. I really don't. On either side of the aisle, whether you're Democratic or Republican, I think that corporate money really muddies the waters.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you on the trust factor being very important. But what do you think you could be doing with the colleagues that will be in Congress to actually make progress on it? We can't just be a whistleblower. We have to get the legislation done. So what's the tactics from the inside that you think might be able to have progressives succeed?
Well, I do think it's kind of a whistleblowery thing. Hold on, I think we've got some kind of delay here.
I think we're fine. Are you there? Right now. We're still, yeah, I'm still here live.
Okay. All right. So, I think part of the problem is, let's see, go back to the question again. It was how am I going to work with the people in Congress
that are already there? Yeah.
Okay.
That's the idea.
So I do think that this, telling the truth, I want to encourage all of my congressional colleagues to be speaking honestly with their constituents. And I think one of the things that Bernie said that was really inspiring is he said, somebody like Mitch McConnell, if he's blocking this legislation, what I'm going to do as a president, I'm going to be the organizer in chief. We're going to go camp out on Mitch McConnell's doorstep and we're going to let the people in Kentucky know exactly what he's doing and why he's doing it. It's cliche to say it, but our government should fear its constituents rather than the constituents fear the government. And obviously we don't have that right now. I would say the same thing about my own race. As a congressman, I would want this level of trust. I would want my constituents to be able to trust that I'm telling them the truth. And based on that, they can choose to elect me or reelect me. But I think it needs to be that way with every congressperson in Congress, that the real story of what happens in government needs to be told to them. So it's a perspective that, it may make other people wary of working with me. But if people are not willing to work with somebody who just wants the American public to get a fair shake, that's something that I would go back and tell my constituents also, or I would make a public issue of that also. I would say, look, we've got a bill. Let's take Medicare for all, for instance. And I say, why aren't Democrats, at least half the Democrats supporting the Medicare for all bill? Well, of course, they're taking corporate money from the health insurance industry and from pharma. And I think it's important for the American public to have an avenue to sort of suss that out, and so I would want my congressional colleagues to be afraid of their constituents in that way, and to have their constituents know you've got to be playing an honest game with people. You can't couch everything in this corporate terminology that is harmful to the majority of the public. But I also would want to be honest about some pieces of legislation. I've said about Medicare for All, while I'm 100% supportive of Medicare for All, and I do not like a public option at all. I think the public option is designed to kill single payer. But I would also say I would not want to be the deciding vote that kills a public option that gets tens of millions of people healthcare coverage that they don't already have. So I think you can do both. I think you can be that voice that is opposing the corporate shenanigans, and you can still be that practical person that says, you know what, at least this moves the ball forward. You can throw a fit about things, but if you're throwing a fit about things and it doesn't help, move the ball forward, then it's counterproductive. So, it's I guess that's what I have to say about that. I mean, I could be an easy person to work with, or I could be a difficult person to work with. It depends on the situation.
It's like the carrots and sticks. And I think the overall kind of summary I've kind of gotten from that is you first have to, build the trust with your constituents, kind of super serve your own people, saying, here's this transparency, here's what's happening. You have a full, clear picture in terms of my regards of what's happening in Congress. Then from there, once you kind of have that security of hopefully being able to easily get reelected, you could be a little bit more chancy picking some fights potentially where someone's disagreeing with you. That is kind of the approach I've seen as like it's like the bully pulpit kind of approach where you're super serving the base. Is that fair?
And the bully pulpit approach is something that I think people where people were really disappointed with Obama is he had the potential to be such a good communicator, but he never wanted to
never put the teeth behind it.
Yeah, and he said, hold my feet to the fire. And when we tried, he completely ignored us. I think Obama had the potential to be a great president, but he never wanted to be that great president. He wanted to go straight down the middle and make as little noise as possible. And I think that's why we ended up with Trump,
Yeah. I think there is some truth in that. Like, you have to accept that you're going to make some enemies to create substantive change, because there's always some institutional barrier or corporate barrier that is going to want to keep you from making that change because it affects their bottom line. If it's providing a basic guaranteed to anyone, that means there's less money in it to make profit. That's just a common fact. So there's always got to be someone resisting you. And for his fact of wanting to kind of make everyone like him, he never actually got the teeth behind some of the proposals. As you said, like the ACA, I think we all would have been thrilled if it was a public option, but we didn't even get that at the time. So now we have to have this debate now about the public
negotiations
option.
Even started.
Yeah. So I think the last question I wanted to ask you before I open it up to my audience here is, I wanted to understand how you generally evaluate these candidates and whether or not they've been doing a good job or not. Say you've been elected, you're serving your whole 2 years in office of a term. How should people judge you in that term?
Well, there is something to be said with, what kind of legislation that you're signing on to and whether that legislation passes. I have said that if I could have a congressional career, and I certainly don't intend to be a career politician, I'm running to kick out a conservative Democrat, and if my district is satisfied with what I do, they can reelect me. If they choose to not reelect me, or if there's wild criticisms, but run somebody else. I mean, put somebody else in. I'm not doing this as a career. I'm trying to, I'm fighting to get health care for people. I'm supportive of Medicare for all, and I will fight tooth and nail for Medicare for all, and I will fight for Green New Deal policies, because the climate emergency is the most pressing thing on the global stage right now, and we may be past the point of no return. I certainly hope that we're not. But the incumbent is not going to do anything. He's already said he doesn't think the Green New Deal is important, and he won't support Medicare for all. So the voters in my district are just going to have to evaluate whether I have done good things, whether I've gotten legislation passed, but really the inspiration for Bernie, people say, well, Bernie never passed a piece of legislation that had his name on it, but he was also the amendment king. I think it's important, if you're looking at a piece of legislation that is just garbage legislation, like a lot of what we're seeing with the bailout bills over the last few weeks. I mean, these are corporate giveaways of trillions of dollars.
Yeah.
Why are our Democratic representatives not fighting for ongoing monthly payments? Why are they not fighting for worker protections? If you're giving $75 billion to the airline industry as a bailout, why are you not demanding that they start redesigning, put some conditions on that bailout money and say, you're going to, and this is in accordance with the Green New Deal, that we want the aviation industry to be less polluting. Why are those strings not attached to that legislation? That's what I look at my own representatives and say, why aren't you fighting for this? You're coming back to the district and you're saying, oh, we got this for people and we got this for people and we're keeping the economy going. But there's no worker protections. There's no environmental protections. And those are the things that I think people want to see. So you get a lot of platitudes from these corporate centrist Democrats that I see a lot of my sort of local constituents are just sort of willing to accept outright without digging around to find out, how things could have been done better. But Bernie was the amendment king. And I think it is really important that when you are faced with bad legislation, you find every avenue that you possibly can to make that legislation better. And I think that is a testament to Bernie's tenacity, and really his legacy in Congress is that he took, I mean, he had some great pieces of bipartisan legislation, but he took a lot of bad legislation and he made it not as bad. And I think, often that's all you can do. So, I would want my constituents to evaluate that. If I get legislation passed that is great, then that's a good thing. But if I am able to take bad legislation and make it better, I want to have that conversation with the public also.
Yeah, and I do think there's also kind of like almost like a slightly invisible metric, because they don't really count it in their traditional metrics of like things that would have been amendments that are being introduced into bills that you can help kill, certain tweaks on the committees in which you're having reviewed and get stuff through. That's important. Yep. Like, as you said, with Bernie, his biggest, I would say, legislation that people credit him to is the veterans bill that he has done. So I think like that is a case where that's really just from the committee he served on, and that's super important. But let's now go to some questions that I had received from the audience. The first question here comes from Mayor Andrew Yang. Ask him about monetary policy and fiscal policy. So what is your general approach of how these two things should be looked at? Monetary policy, do you tend to be a little bit more Keynesian or modern monetary theory, and how you try to adjust that?
I'm definitely MMT.
You're definitely an MMT.
I am MMT all the way. I think it is important. I think it's really important that people understand we've got a sovereign currency. Yes, we can print money, but the way you control inflation is that you spend that money on things that are going to be of public benefit. The way things happen right now is we've got tax breaks for the wealthy. We get a huge amount spent on the military where there is absolutely no return. Every bullet fired and every bomb dropped had absolutely no economic return to the American public. So I think if we when people say, how are you going to pay for it? Okay, yeah, we can print some money, but what are we going to do with that? We've got to rebuild our infrastructure. We've got to invest in education. We've got to, redesign our energy infrastructure to be renewable and sustainable. And if we are investing, if we are taking that printed money and investing in things that are going to have a public benefit return, then we will be able to control inflation that way.
Okay. And how about fiscal policy? What are some forms of taxation that you tend to lean towards when you're considering funding some of these proposals?
Well, if you look over my shoulder, that is tax big business there. That comes directly from Shama Sawant's campaign. I'm 40 miles north of Seattle, and I've been down to Seattle a number of times to stand with Shama on taxing Amazon and There's the city of Seattle, the rest of the Seattle City Council is fighting that. They're conservatives who want to claim they're progressive on the city council, but the reality is we've got it is an offense to humanity that Jeff Bezos has increased his personal wealth $41 billion over the last 6 weeks on this crisis. This is exactly what Naomi Klein described as disaster capitalism. So we have to tax the wealthy. We have to tax big business. We have to raise the corporate tax rate. But I think we need to lower sales tax. I think we need to lower property, and a lot of these are state level things, but we need to lower property taxes. We have here in Washington State, we have the most regressive taxation system in the entire country. We have a high sales tax and we have no income tax. Businesses, there's a reason that Bezos and Gates both live in Washington State. They don't have to pay any state income tax. So here locally, I certainly believe that we need to implement an income tax. And I considered running for the state legislature about 4 years ago. And I talked to the what's called the House Democratic Campaign Committee. And, that's the sort of it's a centrist Democratic group, but they will help Democratic campaigns. And they asked me what my top priorities were. I talked about transportation, I talked about the environment, and I talked about instituting an income tax. And they said, we won't help you with that. That's a dead issue. It's political suicide to talk about an income tax in Washington State. And my opinion is, how do you call yourself the most, Washington has this, we're perceived around the country as being a progressive state, but our taxation policy is extremely regressive. And 6 of the 7 Democrats who are representing us in U.S. Congress in the House are these new Democrats, the new Democrat coalition, the third way Democrats. They are very conservative Democrats. And so, I really want to be a standout in Washington State, along with Pramila Jayapal, in pushing this state to the left locally, but also being a national leader in pushing progressive politics.
So I think this is a good follow-up question. This comes from Justin Swee. His is, how are you going to make sure that the businesses don't use like offshore loopholes to be able to avoid these types of taxations, these types of corporate taxes you wanted to propose?
Yeah, I mean, I am. So the first of all, I would say something along the lines of, if you are hiding your money in offshore tax havens, you don't get to do any business with the American government. That is, businesses that get government contracts should be paying American taxes. I think we got to start there. I am not deeply versed on the intricacies of loopholes, but I would certainly seek to. I got to learn more about it, but to close those loopholes and make sure that the Americans. What I do know is that American corporations using those tax havens and those loopholes probably shirk somewhere around, I've heard the number, $150 billion of tax obligation every year. So yeah, we've definitely got to do something about that. And if you're going to do business with the American government, and I would say for state governments also, that we make that a federal law, you have got to be paying your taxes, and we will close those loopholes.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said on this, but I think you're absolutely right. We just got to first call it out as a priority. Got to make sure we're actually having business be done with American companies, make sure that people are paying their fair share of taxes into the system. I would recommend considering looking up someone actually who's running in my district who has a platform built on this thing. You might know him or not. I think you did an event maybe with him recently, Hector Oseguera.
Hector Oseguera, yeah.
Yeah.
So you're in New Jersey's 8th district.
I am. So yeah, go look up his platform. He has something very specific on that plan, so that you might enjoy reading on that. But I do agree. Yeah. I've always found it weird that they can shirk taxes like this, because if you're an American citizen living overseas, your income tax is the same as if you're here. You're still paying it. But if you're a corporation, you get to avoid that tax. And so they get these like certain citizen rights, like in terms of freedom of speech and the ability to influence our elections, but they don't want to take the full citizenship rights, clearly.
Yeah, well, I also believe that we've got to do away with this idea that corporations are people. There's a fantastic documentary you may have seen. It's called The Corporation. It came out in 2006. Corporations are a legal fiction in terms of their personhood. And I think we've got to work to undo that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So the next question I got for you, this one comes from a Radama. It's a two-part. It's kind of a little bit more tactical of how the campaign is kind of operating right now. They want to know what you think the vote total that you're going to need to be able to win your election in your district, as well as the second part being, what media strategies are you trying to employ to be able to turn out that vote to secure that number?
Okay, so that's a great question. I have a great tech and media team. I worked with a couple of guys out of Southern California. I went down and I did an interview with Cenk on TYT and met with a couple of guys who had done an ad for Rebecca Parson, who's running here in Washington 6th District. And we paid them to come up to Washington State. They filmed a bunch of footage around the district, and they created about a 2-minute 45-second ad for me that we have taken a few sort of 30 or 40-second clips out of, and we're now promoting with targeted social media on Facebook and whatnot. We're probably not going to raise the money to do any kind of TV ads, but I would say for people like myself, I don't even watch TV. So people say, "Did you see this commercial or that commercial?" I'm like, "No, I don't watch TV." I think a lot of people have moved to getting their news from online sources. We're avoiding these ads, but it's the perfect place for a 30-second ad of mine to pop up. In fact, we just released one a week ago, and it's gotten thousands of hits. I've gotten a lot of great commentary, and we're seeing our fundraising increase based on that. So I think that's the way you've got to hit people. You've got to hit people on social media. We have a lot of interest from people on our local college campuses. We've got, Western Washington University. We've got probably 6 or 7 community colleges in the area, and those are people who are willing to hit the streets for us. I mean, when we're allowed to actually hit the streets, but until then, they're doing all of the sharing of our media that we would expect people to be able to do regularly. And then the other thing is we've purchased our data lists, and my tech guy is actually the guy who built Burn App.
Okay.
And so he really knows how to get that data in a targeted fashion so that we're reaching people that way, and we've got text banking and phone banking set up. Right now there are no plans for television. I'm reading the rest of the question. We do have a media manager. I just mentioned we've got a really good tech team. I've got a really great field director who's heading up the text banking operations. And what was the prior question?
The prior question was more on, what is the total number of votes that you're targeting?
Okay. So we're probably going to need to get in touch with around 200,000 people in the district. Probably half of that number for the primary. Our primary is on August 4th. And so, we've got our work cut out for us, but we do have an avenue to do it. We probably need to hit about 100,000 people by the primary, and then once we make it onto the general election ballot, like I said, I've got 5 Republicans filed for this race right now. In fact, filing closes in about 40 minutes, and so I've been checking who has filed for the race. So far, there's 7 of us. Myself and the incumbent on the Democratic side, and then 5 Republicans. So with this district being a reliable split of sort of a 67-33, 1/3, 2/3 Democrat and Republican, I am looking forward to those Republicans just splitting up that third of the voters, and me and the incumbent being on the ballot next to each other. I think if we can get 50,000 votes in the primary, which I think is very doable, then we'll certainly be on the general election ballot.
Yeah. And do you have, just as a follow-up, they wanted to know, did you have any specific numbers, that magic number you're aiming for in terms of votes come this primary, first of all, and then the general? Obviously you gave rough ballpark of how many you need to reach, but do you have that magic number?
Yeah, 45,000 is what we have determined as our win number for the primary.
Okay. And how many volunteers do you have on the staff currently? Like, how has the operations been in managing this so far?
Well, I have a core team of 6 or 7 people, but we have, we have well over 100 people who have signed up to do volunteering for us. So
Well,
I
that's
don't know what
awesome.
the exact number is, but 100 plus.
That's awesome. And, I think the one question I wanted to ask, I'm going to steal a question away from the fans to be able to wrap up here. I mentioned beforehand, I wanted to get back to that student loan debt question that I had said I wanted to get back to at one point, and now we're finally here. So I wanted to ask what the plan is specifically for student loan debt in terms of just a cancellation rather than providing, a more consistent monetary stream to just be able to pay it off. Like, for example, not everyone goes to college, and the people that are going to college tend to be, making more income in general. So why would you not provide like a general fund that both the, non-college educated as well as the college educated are getting as an income stream?
Well, first of all, I'd say my premise is that higher education should be free, just like public education. We pay into a tax pool to fund public education, which I think we need to pay more into that tax pool for public education. I don't think education is funded as much as it needs to be in terms of resources and salaries for teachers. But just based on the premise of undergraduate should be free, graduate school should be free. If education is one of those things that you're bettering yourself, but you're also bettering society. And there are so many limitations to the working class right now that many of them don't even think about going to college or even going to trade school because they can't afford it. So I want to take that right off the table. Educational institutions should be free. Now, public education, like University of Washington, Washington
Yeah.
State University, Harvard and Yale and Stanford, they can all do their own thing. If people want to, pay the big bucks for those institutions, then that's another story. But public education should be free, and that includes our public colleges and universities and trade schools. So with that premise that education should be free, I would then turn around and say, now we're going to wipe the slate for everybody who has student loan debt. Now, even if you paid it in for a private institution, I think we take that off the table and we do a reset. I think it's essentially it's a crime for people to be continuing to make these monthly payments for 30 years, 40 years. For the crime of getting an education. I just think that there's something fundamentally wrong about that.
Well, for that point, I wanted to actually clarify the why just include the private as well. Like, if we're basically saying we want to have going forward, everyone gets this free tuition price, which I'm pretty sure, I think in Washington it's around 12,000 roughly in tuition. So why would we go above that in forgiving debt levels? Because the majority of debt is held by these private institutions. And why wouldn't it just be better for both cases to say, well, if it costs 12,000, you've chosen to go to college, you pay that off with a universal basic income. You can afford that. 12,000 a year is what you get from just $1,000 every month. But if you choose not to go to college and you decide to start a business or go straight into the workforce because you have higher quality, primary education, you now have this $1,000 you can use elsewhere. Why make this service free compared to giving the money to then afford that public education?
I'll be honest with you. I don't have a great response to that, but I've always looked at the whole free education as a public thing. Now, if that is a just sort of a, hey, we're going to give you the money to go to college, and whether you choose to pay it to the public institution or you choose to pay it to the private institution. If you pay it to the public institution, then you have no other debt, right? Your public institution is covered. If the private institutions have a surcharge on top of that you're willing to pay, then that's a separate thing that you'll have to work out and decide whether it's of benefit to you to be able to do that. I don't have a problem with that.
Okay. Well, I think that's
it's not
certainly an
something
interesting
I have
idea to
considered,
explore.
but I certainly don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, and
approaching it
we could
from
certainly
that
have
standpoint.
a longer conversation on that at a separate time. I just wanted to kind of hear out those thoughts. With that being said, I haven't seen any other questions that someone would like to have in chat answered right now. So, Jason, I wanted to thank you so much for taking the time
Sure.
with me today. I really enjoyed having our conversation in general, and I hope everyone can know how to support you in Washington's 2nd District. How can the people that are listening right now be able to support you?
So you can go to my campaign website. It's callforcongress.com. That's FOR, not the number 4. All of my social media is FOR, not the number 4. So it's Call for Congress on Twitter, Call for Congress on Facebook, callforcongress.com. We've got a donate link. We've got a volunteer link. So yeah, help us out wherever you can. I wanted to leave with saying that this is I'm very optimistic about our chances in this race. The incumbent is not particularly well liked in the district. And he is verifiably the most corporate Democrat. He takes the most corporate money, and he votes with the Republicans the most often. I think people in this district are really looking for a progressive option. And I hope that they will see me as that option.
I hope they can support you as well, Jason. So again, if you don't have it, we've left it in the chat. It's callforcongress.com, and you'll see it going across our screen currently. Jason, thank you so much for coming on today.
Appreciate it very much, Sean.
You're very, very welcome. And, Rosebuds, just before we part, I want to let you know some of the other things that we have going on in our itinerary this week. You've just seen our interview here with Jason Call, and we're now doing more interviews as we go along. So tomorrow, we're interviewing Ricky Barajas. He's a candidate in Oregon's 1st District. We're completing that Oregon sweep, as we're going to be having them all on as a recap on Wednesday, right after their primary on Tuesday. So we look forward to talking with all 3 of those contestants on Wednesday. And then, throughout the week, we're going to be having a congressional interview every single day, as well as the week after that, as well as our, universal basic income debate is being moved to now May 27th instead. So thank you all for sticking around and listening to Jason today and hearing more about his campaign. I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow when we talk to Ricky Barajas. Okay, Rosebuds, stay safe out there. I hope you're enjoying your weekend. It's been a long week. I don't know about Jason, but for me, it's been brutal. So have a fun one tonight. Try to kick the quarantine blues. I'll see you all tomorrow. Stay rosy out there.